If you watch the practical example video using many of the principles that we've covered up until this point, you're probably already familiar with both the HTML and the CSS for this page. I did want to show you what I recommend that you do on every single web page that you build. This will help you to find any errors and ensure that your code is valid. Now, we've already talked about this in a previous lecture using the validator. Because I'm working with an HTML5 document, I like to use the html5.validator.new website, and I will use text field. I'll get rid of the text that's here, paste in my own code, and validate, and I just want to make sure that my code is valid. We have discussed in a previous exercise how you may get warnings. It is worth looking over the warnings, but the warnings are something that you can live with. You do not want to have any errors, so make sure if you do get any sort of errors, you will be able to identify them, make the corrections, and ensure that your page is error-free. What we're looking for is this: the document is valid HTML5. Just like we have an HTML5 validator, we also have a CSS validator. I highly recommend that you use this on your CSS files. The CSS validator that I like to use is jigsaw.w3.org/CSS-validator. This works very similarly to the HTML validator. I'm going to use by direct input. I'll go to my CSS and select all of the code and copy it. Then I'll go ahead and paste this in, and if we click check, we should get a page that validates. Now currently, you can see that I have an error. It's telling me my error is on line 54, and it has to do with the property shape-outside. It doesn't exist. If we look in the code and we go down to line 54, you'll see here is my shape-outside property. I'm going to hit the back button, and for right now, I'm just going to get rid of this. We'll talk about why this is problematic in just a moment, but if I get rid of this one line of code and we click check, you can see that now my CSS is completely valid. Once again, this is what we're looking for. When at all possible, we want to have valid CSS. With that being said, the CSS that we are currently using is giving us an error. We looked at this just a moment ago. It has to do with shape outside. Let me tell you that there is actually nothing wrong with this declaration. This is actually completely correct. The problem is the validator has not been updated to support this particular feature. I know this can be confusing, but there is one more resource I want to share with you, and that is caniuse.com. Caniuse is an excellent website that allows you to search for any HTML or CSS property and see if the browsers support that particular feature. So if we go ahead and we type shape outside, it'll bring up the CSS property for shape outside. This is going to go ahead and show me the browsers that support this particular feature. Not only does it show you all of the browsers that support this feature, but it also shows you the versions in which the browser began to support this feature. There's a wealth of information here. So you can see, for the CSS shape outside property, pretty much all of our modern browsers, Edge, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Opera, Safari on iOS, and many of the mobile browsers do support this feature. If for some reason I was targeting IE 11, this particular feature is not supported. So what you should do is when you see an error like this, and you're sure that the code doesn't have any sort of error, check with Caniuse and make sure that that particular feature is supported well enough for you to be able to implement it into your projects. If I scroll down to the bottom of this page, this has all of the shape outside sub properties, and you can see right here this CSS shape outside supporting the 3-value syntax of position and circle and ellipse. That particular feature is not well supported. Now, we are not using that particular property value, so it's not going to be a problem for us, but I did want to show you what it looks like when many of the browsers do not support this feature. You can see that Safari is pretty much the only browser that supports this feature. So this would not be a good thing for you to incorporate into your web pages because many of the browsers that people are going to be using are not going to support this particular feature. Globally, only 18% of users are going to be able to see this. In the US, 35% of users. Those are relatively small numbers when you're building a website. You want to get results that are in the 90s at least. You can see that the shape outside has plenty of support. So even though our CSS validator is giving us an error, we have done our due diligence. We've went ahead and researched and made sure that this property is a valid property and that most of the browsers out there are going to support this feature. In this particular situation, I would be okay using this because this is a fully adopted CSS property. It just happens to be a little bit newer and the validator has not updated to support this. Now you know how to validate your CSS. You know what happens if you have an error and where you should look if you are sure that the error is correct. If we click the back button and let's say we have an error that is not correct, you'll see that now I have an error and it says text align missing a semicolon before the property name position. I will have to click the back button, and all I did in this case was I got rid of my semicolon that's in the middle of a declaration. We've talked about how that can be problematic, so you would need to go in and you would need to fix that. Needless to say, the developer tools are always your best friend. They give you insight as to potential problems that your page may be having and ensure that your code is as valid as it can possibly be.